Ready, set, go!
Well, hello all. I've been away for a couple of weeks, if you haven't noticed. Not had the best May, that's for sure. But I'm back on the mend with a plan of things going on to try and improve things. I'm not going to dwell, it's not about me. I've never made any of this about me. That's just not who I am as a person. But just wanted to give you an explanation of why you probably haven't seen me anywhere on social media or anything for a while, because just things going on. As such, I've merged this weekly database, or bi-weekly, whatever it is, into a bigger one because I had some stuff last time that I was planning to do. I've cut some of it out, but essentially I'm going to merge it into one big video, so it's probably slightly longer than normal, but apologies for that. Anyway, let's stop rambling and get on with the show. So the very first area is one that we discussed briefly on, I think, in the last one. It just happened. So the Microsoft DRM downtime server issue connectivity, basically visibility of the future of digital entertainment. So as you know, since I've ever been in a public space, I've been against DRM, I'm against online solutions, I'm all physical, I'm old school, that's the way it is. And I'm sure many of you guys and girls watching this, in fact, are into digital and physical and both, and choice is always the main important part. So that's where I stand. I do not go against anything that's new, but I go against it when it removes what you currently have, and that's happened in history over the years. So you look at music, look at videos, look at the cinema, all of these things that we used to take for granted, and prior to that, look at books, look at how things have moved on. So everything that's brand new isn't always better. You know, the whole argument about records, vinyl and CDs and tapes and everything else has always been eternal, it always will be. So having a digital solution is great if it doesn't take away, access to your hardware, it doesn't take away access to your software, things you buy. The problem with the digital solution in the gaming space, and predominantly in anywhere else, including streaming systems and services, is the fact that you don't own anything. But this is where Microsoft have gone for a while. This has always been Microsoft's MO. They've constantly lived on the mantra of write once, sell forever. That software's, golden ticket to fame, riches and fortune for companies and individuals and venture capitalists and all that kind of stuff. So Microsoft haven't changed tact here. They've never changed tact. They've always been the same. Everything they ever do is always around making revenue. They're a business. That's nothing bad about that. Every business does that, absolutely. But what Microsoft have been guilty of many, many times is abandoning things when it doesn't work out for them and just leaving their customers high and dry. Trust me, I'm not saying this with bad. I've worked with Microsoft for decades. Anyone remember something like Silverlight, which was a development application for browsers back in the day? They cost me time, fortune, and a company I worked for at the time a huge amount of effort because they just dropped it. A lot of that was around Google being a bit cheeky with their support for it in Chrome, but fundamentally they just let go of it. They've done this on Dynamics, elements of Dynamics in retail, and even things like Spark and XNA. So Zoom phones, Windows phones, they've got history of this. And the problem with DRM solutions is you can't trust a company that has got an MO of trying to maximize their profits and a history of abandoning things when it doesn't work out in their favor. So the problem with what's come out about in here, and this has happened on other services, it's not just Microsoft, we're using it as an example. Sony had their problems when they got hacked, and Nintendo have had their problems as well. Any DRM solution, when it's draconian and it doesn't allow you to have an opt-out clause, is a problem. So what's happened with Microsoft is you've actually got visibility of how bad it can get when services go down. We've seen this recently with the PlayStation 3 update, basically removing the limitation of using their online stores for trophies, and meaning that you don't need to check in and revalidate your own ownership of software again. And one of the good things about what they're doing is the new PS Plus, you actually can transfer over. So I mentioned that before, the fact that you can do it, and that's great. And Microsoft have been very good with the backwards compatibility functionality. That kind of program is ended though. They've put that on hold. They've not sunset it, I suspect. There might be some moments where it gets wheeled back out again for benefits, but fundamentally that's gone. So you've still got a very limited selection of backwards compatibility titles, but all of them, whether you own the disc or not, require you to put the disc in and then download a brand new XE. That's fine, I understand that. But this is a good example of the fact that you've got a benefit right now that you're getting for free and everyone's waving the flag. But if it doesn't work out for Microsoft, they'll abandon it in a heartbeat, and you'll lose access to all those backwards compatibility titles, potentially, because they won't fund the support of that. And this is why DRM is bad. So even if you think it's great and you're a digital only person and you've got Xbox One S or a PS5 digital, and you think, I don't care, it's all great for me, I'm downloading stuff and I get all these cheap deals and I get the Steam basically backlog that I buy and never play. That's great, but understand that one day you might lose access to that and it's all gone forever. And that's why we need to take these examples that we get out in the open and not let things drift away and just pretend that it hasn't happened. And I've seen people that should know better defending Microsoft, okay? Let's be clear. An online infrastructure, I know this stuff well because I work in it, is not simple, but it's not complicated. There is no issue here in managing servers at the level that they should be managing them, considering that Microsoft are one of the biggest providers in Azure that are out there in the corporate space. But just like BT, for example, who I've also worked with for many years, it's well known, and I'm looking left and right here, not giving everyone any secrets, that what will happen is the corporate entities will be treated at a higher level when you've got a clause, you've got a contract about downtime, much better and faster than residential. So what that means is if you've got like a data center or a connection board, some kind of BT hub somewhere where all the network NIC cards are plugged in, if an engineer goes on site and there's a business that's gone down, but there's a NIC for a residential estate that's still up, then they're told to just pull the residential, let that one go down, swap it to the corporate because they're going to get fined on a contract, and then later on replace it. That's exactly what Microsoft are doing when things go wrong. When there's problems, they will not have the investment, the support, and the infrastructure in place because fundamentally there's not a huge amount of money made, or isn't any money made, in fact, profit-wise, from Game Pass. So all these subscription online services are a means to an end. But if it doesn't get to that end, then Microsoft will end it. And that means you'll feel the impact of what DRM really is when they pull it away from you. The way I see these things is like most things that I work in terms of technology. It's a little bit like electricity, okay? Nobody cares about electricity. Nobody thinks about electricity. No one absolutely gives a damn about electricity until you haven't got it. And then everyone cares. Go to any country where they have brownouts and power cuts, and then it's a fundamental part of their main problems. And that's where we are with the online solutions. People have gotten so used to having it available to them that when it's not, you understand what's happening. People tend to struggle to see beyond their nose, and therefore foresight is important. So this is nothing more than me as a personal rambling to say don't let Microsoft get off the hook in terms of DRM solutions, and any other company, be that Sony, be that Nintendo, be that Nvidia, AMD, anybody. If they are offering you an online solution, they should enable an offline solution, even if it's a couple of pounds more to buy and own a service without a DRM check-in. GOG is a great example of this. They don't always get it right, and it's not always there, but I have bought and own a lot of games from GOG simply because I can actually buy them and still copy them and play them on old retro hardware that it supports because it's not DRM. I don't need to check in. Yeah, there's that horrible install you've got to do, and you've got to install it on an online machine. So there's still a bit of a pain around that. But fundamentally, you can still extract that with other tools and use that on a retro box. That's the benefit of having DRM free. And do not let any company tell you otherwise. They can offer you solutions that allow you to buy and own a license. They just won't if the market doesn't force them. So that's the first kind of, this is the problem around DRM, and why as a collective we need to make sure that we don't give an easy time to any company, no matter who they may be, and let them get away with it. So I will be actually covering this in a little bit more depth in some of the areas that I'm well versed in, and obviously some of the areas that I won't be well versed in terms of the individual gaming infrastructure that's in place at this point. So if you are a developer, if you are somebody who works in this space and wants to reach out to me and talk to me about it completely off record, private, and there's no risk there to you as an individual, then please reach out to me on my contact channels or over on Twitter, and we can certainly talk. It would help me a lot if I could get more information from people that work in this particular space, but I do have access to quite a lot of information from other individuals that I know that are involved heavily in that, and obviously I've worked in this space for the best part of 20 years. Sorry about opening on negative, it is one of those things that I am quite passionate about in terms of online and basically, vintage gaming and restoration and just maintenance of the gaming infrastructure. And DRM is basically an antithesis of all of that. It's the enemy of custodians of legacy and of retail ownership. It gets rid of your consumer rights fundamentally because you're being told you're being sold something and you're not. You're just renting it for a period of time, which is a little bit like life, but again, just like this, you pretend that's not finite.
What is Sankawa?
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
Anyway, next up is PS4, PS5 and the Cross Generation. There's been obviously some updates on the Sony earnings sheet and the list. And again, this is one of those things where everyone becomes a corporate expert at this point. And I'm not claiming that I am, but I do work in this space a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of what I do is affected by this. It's affected by revenue streams. It's affected by profit and loss. It's affected by GP. It's affected by all of the things that work in that supply chain. So there's the whole conversation around the fact that the PS4 is going to have a longer life. Yes, of course it is. Again, some experts that should know better online saying things like, you know, this isn't how it used to be. The PS3 was poor. No. Nothing's changed. So just to kind of bring up some history here in terms of where things sit and where they stand. In 2008, so pretty much 2 years after the PS3 launched, the PS2 and the PSP were in huge decline. So at the same time as we're talking around now, looking at the revenue earnings for Sony back then, you've got the PS2 itself had basically nearly 6 million units less sold. That's a huge reduction. And the PS3 was only selling 10 million. So the PS3 still was shipping less units than the PSP even, and only just about above the PS2. The PS2, remember, came out in 2000. And at this point, you've got, what, 2000? Yeah, 2000 in Japan. So the worldwide software units, the actual sales at that point, the PS2 had dropped off considerably. So even though it had a reduction of nearly 6 million units, it lost 70 million in terms of software sales. But this was recouped by that much smaller and relatively slower install base for the PS3, 45 million increase over the previous year, year on year, which meant that Sony at that time, their operating profits actually went up. So they made, their losses went down. So they got closer to making a profit. And that continued for the next few years, even though the PS2 was in decline. What we've got now, as I've just mentioned actually around DRM solutions, is the fact that Sony have multiple avenues to market, which is what companies strive for. So if they can sell you something one way, that's great. So bricks and mortar used to be the bread and butter of all companies. You had to have good relationships with them. You had determination in terms of what companies couldn't do, and a lot of retailers can actually pick apart prices, structures, get exclusive deals. Look at what happened to Sega with what they did back in the 90s when they peed off a lot of retailers by doing the Saturn launch and dropping it out of certain stores, to the point where it heavily affected their Dreamcast launch in the West because of how they treated retailers. That's kind of gone now. There's no need to do that anymore. But Sony have got these established markets of which they'll sell. They sell directly to you online, they sell in stores, they sell digitally. They've got all these avenues and digital options elsewhere, such as Amazon. So they've got a lot of options to sell. But what they can't do is they can't invest the kind of money that their games take. And I'm not going to get into that conversation, but you do not make games that cost hundreds of millions of pounds and stick them on a £10 a month subscription service, because just any high school graduate can do the basic mathematics on that and say, hang on a minute, that doesn't add up. It's not about economies of scale. It's just about basic economics. If you are not pulling in enough revenue, how can you make a profit? And people keep quoting things like, sales turnover. And it's all around your profit margins. If you're not making profit and you're not increasing your market, then you're not going to get venture capitalists. You're not going to get investors. And your stock market price is not going to go up. It's all around driving that constant need to improve on the next thing. The PS4 is a market. It's another route to market. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So if Sony could still sell PS3s and PSPs, they would. But the manufacturing, supply and maintenance cost of all of those things, including, remember, you've got to offer support packages for hardware support, which means it comes around, supporting the user at the time. You've got a year's worth of return to hardware manufacturer if there's a fault. All of those basic consumer rights, which can get much longer in Europe, all of that is a factor into your operating costs. Therefore, it reduces your profit margins. You have to factor all that shrinkage into your forecasts. So Sony are going to maximize all of that because they're in that transition. Because they're in that transition stage. They're in a point of wanting to go from manufacturing R&D. They've got to recoup all that money that the PS5 and the PSVR 2 has cost. So they've got to work all that out in the short term and long term. And any financial investor is going to sit there. Any FD worth their salt is not going to say, let's drag this out for 3 years and cap extra charges. That's not going to work. That's not how companies work. There's a huge revenue in gaming. It's the biggest entertainment market there is on the planet. So therefore, what they're doing is they're maximizing that. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, if you're making a game, there's nothing fundamentally different from the PS5 to the PS4 that could not be factored around a development. You might have to remove a few options, you might have to change some infrastructure, you might even have to split teams off, but Sony are big enough, first party teams are big enough to do this. So you drive that profit revenue and you say to yourself, I'm going to spend 300 million as an example to make the remake of The Last of Us, for example. The remake of The Last of Us, the first one, might be almost certainly a PS5 exclusive, I would imagine. It's one of the big areas that they can drive, because they've sold it on the PS3, the PS4, and obviously the sequel. But there's nothing stopping that title coming out on PS4. You're not going to spend another 300 million making a PS4 title, but you could recoup 300 million in sales. Not profit, sales. So that's it. Just do the math. These are businesses. Everyone's a business. So like I've just said. But again, it's this whole, we can't get wrapped up in our own, need for being technology driven, because technology is absolutely one of my core passions, and many of yours, I'm sure. That's why you're probably watching my channel. But you've also got to be realistic that, one doesn't negate the other. If you have technology and no market, it's kind of pointless. No one's going to buy it. We've seen that time and time again. So Sony are playing the game. They're playing their hand in terms of maximizing profit. So I'm sure the PS4 will run for ages, but we still had PS2 titles 5 years after the PS2 was basically ended because of the PS3. Yeah, very small, very niche, very, football titles and sports titles, but they were still being released. Why? Because there's money in it. You can't just abandon a market, and also it can leave a bad taste in your mouth. If you were a PS4 owner and you happened to buy a PS4, for want of a better description, in 2019, you thought, I'm going to buy the Bullet, I'm going to buy a PS4, I'm going to play God of War, it's absolutely amazing, I'm going to jump into the new Spider-Man, absolutely great. You've only had 2.5 years of PS4, and all of a sudden you're like, I've got to buy another £300, £400 console now. What's that about? You might then not buy another PS5 because you feel alienated by the fact that you jumped in. You and I will know the logic behind that, but that's not how retail works. That's not how consumers work. They've got to think of everyone. Every Tom, Dick and Harry has to be treated equally, or at least perceived to be treated equally. So the point here is they're maximising profit, not just in they're making profit, which is always the main drive, but also keeping and retaining their market share and their customer base. By treating PS4 players well, or pro players well, they're more likely to become a PS5 player, or even, later on PS6 or PS5 Pro, or whatever that might be. The whole point of this is around them maximising it. Don't get hung up on the fact that it's going to hold back titles. It won't. You've seen already from Horizon how much better titles can be in terms of the PS5 and PS4 version. Certainly, that was a title that shows the difficulties that can occur. And I think that had that title been made directly for PS5, it would have been better, but it wouldn't have been fundamentally different. It would have had, visual niceties and all that. But there's nothing stopping Sony taking the time, and now they've got a lot more time and understanding of the hardware and the engines that they're building around it, to do more with it. So again, all of this profit and return and the whole kind of public showing sheet that they showed off, you've got to dig a little deeper than that. You've got to dig into what their profit margins are, what are they targeting, where's their market going. And PSVR 2 is another huge revenue stream. It's another route to market. And that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of how companies see things. You've got to play the game. There's a lot of, combining and converging technologies within Sony itself, and they're doing a very good job in maximizing that, which means that, unfortunately, if you are a PS5 owner, you might not get the absolute pinnacle of the PS5 over the PS4, but I tell you what you will get. You will get titles that do 60 FPS more often. You will get options in your graphical settings. You will get the ability to load games in a heartbeat. So all of the core benefits that the PS5 offers, including PSVR 2 options, the DualSense options of the controller, and the 3D audio, all of those things will still be there. So you're not missing out a great deal. And actually, you're benefiting more because you'll get more games with a bigger investment, because they know they can recoup it with the PS4. As great as the PS5 is selling, obviously it could sell more if they had more units, they're not really going to make the same amount of money back on just PS5 titles. So again, it's all about hedging your bets. So not everything is bad, not everything is good. It's usually somewhere in the middle. So don't be too worried about PS4 and PS5 Cross-Gen continuing. Like I say, I expect another year or two and potentially a few more bigger games. Maybe even things like Wolverine are going to be cross-gen as well. I wouldn't be surprised. What have we got next? Wow, new games. Exciting. One of my favourite titles of the last couple of years was Jedi Fallen Order. I thought it was a cracking title. I thought it went back to the roots of Star Wars. I think it had a really good kind of exploration, puzzle solving, Uncharted kind of Metroidvania. It was just everything I wanted from a Star Wars title, and it had really good combat. Yeah, it could have been better, but it certainly had a nice little skill tree there, and I enjoyed playing it on every single console under the sun. Now we're getting a sequel, Jedi Survivor, which looks cracking. Obviously not a lot to see here. It's a pre-rendered CGI movie. There's some information and stuff around the story. It looks interesting. They're certainly merging into that constant Empire, you know, Star Wars Vader kind of area that they always seem to drift into with the Siths and everything else. But again, there's a lot of source material here that they can pull from. So I'm very excited about seeing more from this. And like I say, this was a great title that actually boosted quite a lot. And it was actually one of the titles when I covered it that showed off the benefits you get from writing to the direct hardware APIs. The Series S, for example, saw significant improvements from going from its backwards compatibility version, which, you know, had 60 FPS options and a base resolution as the Xbox One. It actually improved resolution and performance, I think somewhere around 30% I saw in my tests. So that's a good example of how important it is to write a native application for the native hardware you're targeting. Again, this one, which means we'll see a huge improvement, talking to StarWars.com, Stig Abelson, the director, said that they're really working hard on ray tracing, and by the sound of things they're using it for GI, so they're using it for real-time lighting, and fundamentally they're going to use that for GI bounce and light solutions. So that's really, really impressive. I think that will be excellent in the cinematics, because what that has allowed them to do is, as I've mentioned in my ray tracing videos before, one of the big benefits of ray tracing is not as much for the user as it is for the developer. It means you can iterate much faster, and Stig actually said that in his interview, that they can, you know, iterate much faster on the lighting mechanisms in the worlds and the games, and not have to wait to pre-bake stuff out and just go straight into the title and play it. So that's absolutely exceptional, and I really am looking forward to playing this title and certainly seeing more for it from EA. It's one of those games that I loved. Like I say, it felt like an old school game. It wasn't wrapped up too much in drawing you into, you know, loads of quests and picking up crap everywhere and distracting you and all this other stuff. It was really a very linear title, but it had enough wide areas to try and drag you off into little secret sections and have battles and repeat play, because there were such good moments in the title right the way through. So yeah, definitely love that title. Really am looking forward to more Jedi. And I hope that it kind of reinvigorates the Jedi world. You know, things like the old Jedi Academy titles on the PC. There's a lot that could be done in this space that I think would work very, very well with the modern gaming infrastructure. So glad to see that Respawn are pushing hard on that, and there's loads of Star Wars games in the making. So maybe more will come. Great stuff. Self-plug. Long since coming, again, all been delayed for everything else that's going on, but my Dreamcast versus Neon 250 versus every frigging piece of hardware under the face of the earth is almost finished. So there's already part one, which is over half an hour long. I've had to chop it into bits. We're talking potentially 2 hours worth of material here. There's so much stuff that I've done. I kind of disappeared into the ether on this one, but that's already up for Patreons now. So if you are not a Patreon, you can sign up to my Patreon now from $1, £1, and then you can get access to this new material. I'm going to have this constant feed of brand new exclusive content, extended content, and obviously early access content on Patreon to make that worthwhile. Simply because I don't earn any money from YouTube. I haven't done anything for a few weeks, and my earnings are zero. That's how bad my earnings are. If I don't put a video up every week, I'll earn nothing, because my old videos just seem to not get watched, because I just don't get that repeat viewing from the market. I'm not promoted, and I drop right down the order, and I already earn bugger all anyway. So to make money back, and I couldn't do this kind of deep, invested, retrospective, hard, really, you know, going back to my roots. It's that classic saying where, you know, I've forgotten more than you'll remember. It sounds arrogant, but that's literally where I am. I remember I worked with a guy years ago in the 90s that said that. So I now get what he means. Sometimes you did things so long ago that you come back and think, oh, hang on a minute, I remember I used to do this. So I've been playing with drivers and configurations and getting things to work and peeing around Windows 98 and 95 and but it's been absolutely exceptional, and I've got some excellent results and data and just comparisons that I think, if you're into old retro hardware, if you're into the Dreamcast and just the potential the Dreamcast offered and just how ahead of the game it really was, try and check that video out, because I think it's really, really good. There's lots more to come, probably 3 or 4 parts as we're broken down to. The patrons will get all of that soon, so at least once a week. And I don't even know when I'm going to release the public yet. I'm going to make sure the patrons get a good view on this, because I want to make sure that my supporters, you guys and girls, have really get the best benefit for your subscription, so that I can try and give you from that. And I'm not locking it out of anybody yet. I'm just doing this basic subscription. So subscribe. A couple of dollars a month is very, very helpful. In fact, if only a small portion of people did this on my channel, I could quit my job probably and go full-time on this. And there's so much more that I could do if I was full-time. But this is all part-time. People forget I do this as a side gig, and when things go a bit left of field and AWOL like they did the past month, then just affects my flow, affects my mindset, and certainly affects my time. So that's why it's been a bit of a delay. So again, this one's quite fast-paced. I'm conscious that my brain's working even a million miles an hour, which is fast for me because my brain works at that rate anyway. So apologies if this one's very fast and very frantic. It won't be very well edited either, so I do apologise for that. I'm trying to get this up because I've just been away for so long. I don't want to miss the market or where it is. But yeah, Dreamcast Neon 250, very rare card. If you are interested in all that retrospective stuff, then go and check out my Patreon. Support me there and get early access to that and much more to come. It's great, in my humble opinion. New consoles. Yeah, I've seen this kind of thing about I think it's TLC. That were doing a release on potentially new consoles in 2024. Just harking right back to my PS4, PS5 bit earlier. It's crap. I'm going to come right out and say it's crap. Don't believe any of it. It's I'm not saying it's not based on some element of truth. The problem is that, again, letting you into a little secret here, left and right, no one should really know, companies do R&D all the time. And R&D can get very heavy into development. It can get to a point of having a prototype. It can get to a point of having a batch of prototypes. It can even get to the point of being sent out to developers and suppliers and even some, retail customers for testing instructions and feedback. All of that doesn't mean it gets to market. It never does. I would be amazed, to my very core, if Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony don't have things in the works that are potential market changes. PS5 Pro is almost certainly have been thought of and would have been tested and looked at. Remember that, as I've covered way back in my older videos, before the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, console manufacturers always did change development. So you had the PS2 Slim, you had the PS1 and all that small versions, even back to the Mega Drive, Mega Drive 2, Master System, everything. It's the Atari VCS, the Atari 2600, then to the VCS. So it's nothing new here. It's always been this way. But what tends to be the reason is they use it to claw back costs, to claw back manufacturing costs, to claw back performance, even solve issues in terms of the PS3 Slim and the Xbox 360. So that's always been the case. This was the first time they saw an opportunity because I think the development of those consoles was going to go either way. So they essentially would do we go down really forward thinking, bleeding edge, a console's going to die? Because there was definitely a point in 2012, 2011, 2013 where mobile could take over the world and everyone would just go, screw it, I'll use my phone for everything. And I don't think companies really knew. So they went down and hedged their bets. Microsoft far more than Sony did. I think Sony played a blinder in terms of what they did. And again, nothing new. They played that memory card. Commodore 64 did that. That's always been a thing about developing hardware and playing the market. Is things going to become cheaper and more expensive? So with the Pro and the Xbox One X, they used that reduction, the die shrinkage and the manufacturing reduction to kind of do both. They gave you increased performance within a finite scope in terms of additional memory for certainly in the Xbox One X, but additional power and resources, but they had to do it by balancing it out. And the Pro, I don't think, paid off in terms of its overall ends. It was never a massive increase to sales. It was about stopping the bleed to PC. That was the point in the Pro. And the Xbox One X was around taking over that we've got the best console on the market, which they did, and that's exactly what. Each company has their own motives. I don't think with the PS5, they can't manufacture enough, and moving to a new node system is obviously going to benefit them if they go to a 6nm or whatever they go to, because in the end, manufacturing companies move to the latest manufacturing because you get more out of the same yield. So the wafer becomes more usable, you get less yield issues, so you don't get binned off parts that you can't use. So there is definitely a benefit there for them to do it. But do you know what? There's just as much benefit to say what they used to do, which is go to a smaller node, get more out of the same wafer, cut costs everywhere else, reduce the heating costs because everything's smaller and cheaper, doesn't run as much power, and therefore, Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. I've now got a cheaper console that I'm making more money on, and I can make more of them, so I'm going to sell PS5. So I don't suspect we're going to see a PS5 Pro or a Series X Excellent, or I don't know, whatever they're going to call it. I don't think that's the thing. I think Xbox could release another console. They could definitely go for another one, because their market and their sales plan is very different. They just want to keep selling you Game Pass. So the more items and routes you've got to Game Pass, the better. But again, it doesn't make any sense, because all of that's going to cost. Marketing, bringing something to market, selling it, advertising, all of that costs a fortune. Microsoft can obviously spend it because they hemorrhage money all the time. They make a fortune from their infrastructure process, their Azure systems, Microsoft, cloud, Office, all of that makes an absolute fortune. Certainly in the corporate and education space, that's one of their big revenue streams. Sony, a little different. So I suspect that all of this is around confusion and just hoping and praying, looking to the stars and rubbing the stones together and hoping that we get, was it HDMI 3 I saw in there as well, and 8K 120, just pie in the sky, just stuff that's potentially on the market. So don't read anything into it. I do not think it's real at all. In fact, I'm almost sure it's not. But what I do think we'll see is an updated PS5 and Series X release, and probably even the Series S sometime next year, maybe even the end of this year. That might be a slight change in design and construction, but predominantly designed to reduce costs, improve yields, and therefore improve supply. I do think that's a definite thing. Maybe some minor tweaks in there, but I wouldn't expect anything revelatory, because it just segments the market even more. And PlayStation have been very, very clear on that. The Pro was held back by the fact they didn't want to segment the market, in my opinion, and I said that at the time. But again, this is what you need to look at, not just from a technical, I'm a technophile and I love the fact that all these things are brand spanking new. You've also got to look at the business perspective, because without both, you don't get anything to market. So yeah, I don't think that TCL report is anything other than pie in the sky. PlayStation Plus has now launched, which is good. I will be covering that very, very shortly. I know it's out in Asian markets, but again, that's a very different market to us. So it's probably the earliest version, and I am aware that there's work going on in the emulation space within PlayStation. There's obviously a lot of things that I talked about in my previous video around the PS3 emulation. Again, this is a revenue stream. This is again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but this is what I mean about you've got to work in this space to understand the space. PlayStation's route to market, their market revenue, how they get out there. Subscription is another one, and they're maximising on that. So they're going to PC, and it will be delayed. It will never be day and date. Their subscription service in PS Plus will not be day and date, but they can sell you or enable you to play retro games. And they know that majority of the market is never going to own the original PlayStation 1 disc or the PSP cartridge or whatever, and you haven't got a route to plug it in anyway, most of the time. And even reading discs on the PS5 is difficult because of the manufacturing mechanisms of the PS2, the PS1, the PS3. There's all these kind of variations of medium that you can use. Not impossible, obviously, because it doesn't need to read the entire disc. It just needs to read the footer sector, the header sector to kick off. So there's all that kind of stuff around, but I'm not going to get into that here. But the point of this conversation is the PS Plus mechanism will be improve over time, so long as people subscribe to it. So they are, like I said before, they're putting their toe in the water. They'll have a few things in the work that will improve it, and they'll improve the emulation stage. So that might improve things like the resolution style, the frame rates, the performance levels, the quality overall. I have already seen things online, again, like the PlayStation Classic, which I covered, and I gave it a thorough slapping as it deserved. They used the PAL versions because of language. I said that then, and I said that now. A lot of people don't get that, but it's because you're not doing any work. Sony don't own the rights to every title on PS Classic, so that means that when they go and release something, they've got to speak to the publishers of that, whoever owns the IP, and get permission to release it. And then you've got the fact that they're the custodians of their own IP, and they might not have maintained it as well, so they might not have a European version available that's in a code state that they can release, and therefore they've got to take what they can get, and that might be a Japanese version, it might be an NTSC version, it might mean they have to skip it and not add it into the list at all. So all these things become a factor. Not everything you see is down to corporate money-grabbing reasons. It could be down to the fact that it's just a logical business sense to say, let's release the European version because that's got every language we need, and it will cover most of the markets that we release in. So, America, South America, Mexico, Quebec, French, German. There's all these different languages that European covers because we're a unusual state. We've got all these languages and areas around us, which is not the standard area for a lot of other parts of the world. So again, not everything here is a negative or a bad reason. There's always very good reasons most of the time. What's the old saying? Never put down to malicious that can be easily explained away by incompetence. That's essentially what I'm saying here. People leap to the first conspiracy theory, and actually it's usually something much simpler than that, i.e. it's too expensive, it's not possible, or it just isn't available anymore. So yeah, PS Plus, do look out for that. We'll be covering it in a great deal of depth, but I do expect it to be very much a moving feast over the next few months as things ramp up and things come out. And watch the left eye wink wink PS3. Let's just see what happens in that space. FSR 2.0, that's something I will be covering. I did start to look at this, but with one title I thought to myself, you know what, Deathloop's great and all, but one title really doesn't, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So I probably waited until a few more titles come out. I know a few more hit now, so I need to cover that in some more detail. It's a shame that some of the bigger titles haven't had it, so I would have liked to have seen something like Death Stranding or God of War get it. I think there'll be a great one to cover, or something that really, demands a lot from the hardware that's a high DLSS kind of title. So something like, what's the game? So something like Control would be great because of the ray tracing techniques and the fact that it supports a lot of things. So it would be good to see more titles use FSR, but right now there's probably not quite enough for me to make a full video out of it. But don't worry, I have started something and we'll be looking at it. I'm hoping I don't get any more bad news. That's it. Oh no, one more. Yeah, on my list here. The AM5 boards. So I mentioned this before, new CPUs, new boards. I can't believe it, but the AM4 board's been out 5 years, in fact. So it's been AMD again, just going back to my old stuff. Boards lasted reasonably long, and then we had that kind of period between 2010-ish where boards changed quite a lot. Intel are terrible for it. They're still just as bad. So it's great to see that AMD have kept the board for a long period of time, and I'm hoping to see substantial improvements in the AM5 board on the next Zen 4 chip and what that will offer in terms of unifying the board, taking some of the elements of what consoles can offer and bringing that into the PC space by getting much faster traction on the PCI Express SSDs, unifying RAM, bringing things together, increasing cache sizes. There's a lot of exciting stuff in the PC space, and expect me to cover that in a great deal of depth, very technical depth, that I do tend to think that I offer quite a lot over other people. So that is my main area of expertise fundamentally in terms of where I work. So you struggle with, one of the reasons why I struggle with PC, or at least perceptually, is the fact that if you work in servers and hardware and PCs all the time, you kind of get to the point of saying, do you know what, I'll play on the console when I like to play. So I've always flipped and flopped between it. I've never not had a computer. In fact, my history really is microcomputers more than anything. I had the Atari VCS, and then went to the Commodore 64, the Spectrum slightly before that, and then the Amiga ST onwards and onwards. So I've always been a PC person, but I've always flip-flopped between console. And I think probably since late 90s, when I got out of console game, went back into it again. It's been the longest run of consoles, but PC generally was never as exciting as it was in the 90s and early 2000s. That was it. That was the best. PC kind of exploded, and I was right in the middle of that, which you can hear more in my Dreamcast video. But all of that is very, very exciting for me. So it's interesting to see that PCs getting to the point where I feel as if there's the impetus of that kind of happening again with new technology, new motherboards, with GPUs and CPUs and RAM and cache all taking significant leaps. I do see the potential for things happening in the PC space over the next 3 or 4 years that would not be possible 2 or 3 years ago. I hope I'm not wrong, and I hope there's a lot more to see here, but I'm excited to see what comes next in that space. So, again, apologies if this has been a billion miles an hour, kind of how my brain's at the moment. But let's move on to Q&A from my Patron. So thank you very much. So we've got David Braithwaite asks, with the release of the PS5 and Series X, we've gotten rather used to 60 FPS. It's really jarring to go back to 30 FPS, even if you throw in 4K or ray tracing. Do you think we'll have to say goodbye to 60 FPS as more advanced engines like UE5 are used? Excellent question, and I'm sure it's one that's on the lips and hearts and minds of many out there. So, kind of alluding to what I said right at the start of this rambling episode, that's it. It's a differentiator. You know, it's something that makes you go, PS5 version is lovely. I'll get that. So yeah, I do. I do think it will remain for a good while. Will it always remain? Absolutely not, because as it should be, and I've always advocated, 60 FPS is an option. It's never not been an option. I've had some weird conversations with people, again, that should know better, around the fact that, you know, because of technology, things weren't possible. It's like, what are you on about? 60 FPS was always the standard, or 50 FPS in PAL, because of TVs. So in actual fact, it was the other way around. It was TVs had to force you to run at the rate the TVs had to run. So you ran at the speed they could run at. You could run faster, but what was the point? But PCs were always above 60. You know, you had 75, 85, 90, 100 FPS. You had all these weird and wonderful refresh rates. But again, technology is a choice. So as a developer, do I want to run 60? Do I want to run 120? Do I want to run 144? Or do I want all of the niceties that the power of inside the consoles and PC gives me? Do I want to maximize the graphics capability and push ray tracing and reflections and beautiful GI? Or do I want to push AI and physics and interaction and really stress the CPU and actually, you know, bottleneck there? Absolutely. And I think that's the most important part, is teams get to choose what they want. If they want to push 30 FPS, I'm pretty sure Naughty Dog will. Pretty sure Naughty Dog will not move to 60 FPS. They might add a 60 FPS option, but probably only for multiplayer, because that's kind of where they focus on. But I think predominantly in multi-platform, and even a lot of first party for a while, yeah, you'll still see 60 FPS in my opinion, because it's a good route to split out the power benefit of PS5 and Series X. When you've got a Pro and an Xbox One model that pushes 4K resolutions on the tin, it's harder to prove that that's worthwhile when you can't really show it off. But you can show off double the frame rate. And I think that's where a lot of companies will push. So Sony, Microsoft will definitely push forward on 60 FPS. So I do suspect we'll see it for a good while long. And even beyond that, Unreal Engine 5, as I covered in my Unreal Engine 5 coverage, that doesn't limit people to 60 FPS. It's just a silly technology-driven conversation where people don't understand it. Nanite is very early on, and it's very, very performance demanding. It sucks a lot of the headroom out of hardware, much more on PC because of the construction of PC and all the interfaces going on with the North Bridge and South Bridge and all these split pools of RAM and all that additional load that it puts on the developers and the hardware itself. All of that will be improved. It will be significantly improved. You've only got to look back at games at the start of a generation, the end of a generation. Look at my very, very first video where I talked about the Xbox 360 at the start and the Xbox 360 at the end, and just see what that means in terms of what you're getting out of the hardware. Unreal Engine 4 is brand new, and the reason it's now gone out into public space is because more people doing the same thing, everyone's fixing the same problem, and it gets better. So there you go, an answer and a video, and almost an hour long. So I think I'll draw it to a close there. Now, I did have a few more Q&A questions, but I'm going to push it to the next week's video, and I'm going to do one next week, probably a little bit sooner. There's a few things I want to talk about on that. So please, if you are a Patreon, then please get your questions over to me on the Patreon link and I will get them. And if there's enough, I'll just make a video about Patreon questions, because that's always a good thing. And if you're not a patron and you want to see access to the Dreamcast Neon 250 and other exclusive stuff now and in the future, then please subscribe. It really helps me. It helps improve my quality. It helps improve the content that I can make and all the good stuff that I do. And you can ask me a question about anything. So it can be about retro, modern, hardware, whatever it might be. Ask away and I'll put it in the video. And it could be a great question that really, you know, sparks conversation in the comment section down below. So please do try, if you want to, join Patreon, and obviously subscribe to the channel, share where appropriate, and all that good stuff, because I really need you guys and girls' help to improve the quality and the coverage that I get. Hopefully I won't be disappearing into the ether again with a plan in place, but the fingers crossed it's all going to be good from here on in. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please check back for lots more content coming up soon here and over on IGN as well, which I also do the performance reviews on there. There's quite a few bits coming up this month. It's been a bit of a quiet 2 months at the moment, but I'm sure there's lots more for us to get excited about and get into our new video game technology. And obviously a lot of retro stuff, which is a big, close passion of mine since I grew up with it all. Anyway, bye. Catch you on the next one. Thank you very much.
An eternity passed, and my torment receded, bringing me back from the precipice of madness. The descent had destroyed me, and yet I lived.
You